This week on Philosophers in Space, we learn that rebellions are built on hope and a lot of dead bodies.
Philosophers in Space.
Welcome back to Philosophers in Space. I am your captain, Callie Wright, and I am joined, as always, by my chief ethics officer, Aaron Rabinowitz. Aaron, how are things, friend? What's going on?
Captain, I have a question.
Oh, God.
Why did they have to go so hard?
Along those lines, I am a person who tries really hard to not ever put people's private conversations out into public, right? People say things to me. It's important for me to respect the privacy and the vulnerability of that moment. But I feel like it's very, very important that I share something with everyone that you sent me before I started the second half of this show.
I look forward to your dramatic reading. Let's hear it.
You said, and I quote, "Feel free to message me when it crushes you into a fine powder and snorts your ass. I'll be here for you." And my thing is, after the first half, I didn't think you were being hyperbolic. I imagined that I would actually feel that way. And wow, I was not okay.
Yeah, no, there are so many points at which I have to literally, I don't think I ever used the phrase, "Why did somebody go so hard?" before in my life. It was just not part of my lexicon
right?
Until I watched this show, and that just became part of, it's the only way to describe this show. Why does it go so hard in every scene with every person? Why did you have to hurt me like this?
And we're straying deep into our exposition zone discussion, but I guess at the beginning here I should introduce that we are talking about the second half of the first season of Andor.
No, they cried through it.
Along with us,
right
I'm sure.
Title.
It is there in the title. And I was unprepared, especially because I watched a couple episodes of The Mandalorian and I was like, okay, this is cool, but I'm not excited about watching the rest. It didn't grab a hold of me and make me feel I have to know what happens next. And after hearing you talk about it and seeing all the discourse on the internet, I said in the last episode, I expected to like it. I expected it to be good. I did not expect it to affect me as deeply as it did. So before we jump in, a little bit of housekeeping. Just wanted to say we've been seeing the reaction that people have to the changes that we're doing to the show, responses to the survey, the discourse in the Facebook group, and it warms my cold dead heart to see everyone welcoming me.
Your thorax slug.
Yes. So thanks everyone for making me feel very welcome. We like to play about being cold, dead, emotionless, all of those sorts of things. But at my heart, I am a softie, and it's been very, very fun interacting with everyone and talking with everyone. It was a very fun secret to keep for a little bit while we were, working on stuff behind the scenes and waiting to record and stuff. So I'm very excited about that. And, just keep an eye out for, Aaron and I have been talking a whole lot about different things we want to do for more content, for better content, for putting stuff in different places. You might have seen we're doing video. So if you haven't, check out the Philosophers in Space YouTube channel. Go subscribe. For right now, it's just video versions of the show. And I think, Aaron, you're going to do some stuff there, maybe?
Yeah. So, not unlike the Rebels, we are raising funds. We are trying to, think about how we want the show to be something that is both in keeping with our deeply socialistic tendencies, but also growing and, able to properly compensate our own droids and whatnot, so that they are not treated as slaves, despite obviously being sentient. So yeah, as Callie mentioned, they're already working on videos. Patrons are already getting videos. YouTube's going to have them soon, hopefully. And I'm also going to catch up on the intro lecture videos that I promised to patrons way back when. So there's going to be a bunch of like intro to ethics kind of content for folks who, you know, are maybe new to the show and are wanting more of the like, let's define utilitarianism, deontology in a row kind of stuff. So we'll get that out there for everybody free of charge. We are also looking, you know, we sent out a survey and we got an amazing amount of responses. You know, we were expecting tens of responses, but we got quite a few and they were very sweet. And there was a lot of really helpful sort of feedback on what y'all are wanting more of. And what we're hearing a lot of is that y'all are wanting more philosophy. And it's, you know, we're ongoing project of like trying to make the episodes the right size and shape for everyone's preferences. And I think part of that we're deciding is just going to mean we need longer shows. And it's, you know, some people are like, I want only an hour, and I get that. Our editor is one of them. But she also understands.
I am one of them, honestly.
Yeah, you're one of them.
I don't at all mind the idea of making longer content, but usually like 30 or 40 minutes is the cap for me in terms of what I really enjoy listening to. But like, it's philosophy, it's complicated, and you can't do 30 minutes and like really explore philosophy topics, I don't think. So it makes total sense.
Yeah, and especially when we have stuff like Andor, where we're just going to have to talk about the content so much because it's so good, and then there's going to be so much philosophy, you know, it's hard to fit it all in. We're feeling pressed. So what we're thinking is we're looking at 2-hour episodes. That's still not hitting your 3-hour IDW level. It seems, you know, and we're going to continue to tighten up the various pieces and bits and whatnots. But that's going to be our sort of first main goal. And we will say, you know, this patron kind of drive that we're looking at here, we're not looking to like set a specific number in terms of how much we're getting per episode or per month or something like that, right? We're looking at how many more people we can bring in. So whatever amount that you can support at, we're gonna, you know, that's gonna help, you know, push things along. Other things that we have pretty much locked in that I think people will be excited to hear about. Folks asked for a little bit like possibly like hangout time. I know that a lot of folks do that. I've often struggled with the parasocial nature of those kinds of decisions, but I think we found the perfect way to defray every concern there, which is we're going to make it about the puppies.
Yep, that's the way to do it.
Space puppy hangout. That's the plan.
Don't build a parasocial relationship with me. Build it with my dog.
I have a parasocial relationship with everyone else's dogs. Why shouldn't you?
Yep, hard agree.
Most ethical thing in the world to do. So yeah, we are thinking about some hangouts, which will be fun. You know, we've got the time for it. Maybe we'll answer some questions. Maybe we'll just stare at the puppies and snuggle them, and who knows. But that's on the list, and merch for sure is on the list. And convention shows, it seems like, are going to be a thing. Like, I think we're going to make that happen as fast as we can because we like hanging out with people and we like meeting folks, and it's almost, you know, it's way more fun in person.
Yeah,
like
there's definitely work happening behind the scenes on getting us to conventions and stuff. There's really nothing to report as far as like anything that's actually happening right now, but that's
these are
not
longish terms.
But that's, you know, emails have been sent. We'll say that we're trying to make that stuff happen. So as soon as we know about it, you will. And the next 2 episodes after this are going to be Q&A episodes, and during those episodes we're going to have a lot more to say in terms of specifics and in terms of the goals that we want to hit and the specific things that we're going to do. But, you know, just kind of wanted to keep folks apprised as to what the plan is. We're doing a lot of behind the scenes talking. We're both just like very stoked and honestly like teenager level giddy about about doing this thing.
I mean, I'm not going to say that I wasn't watching certain individuals in our current content talking about raising funds and being like, yeah, let's raise some funds. Let's do this. But, you know, further revolution, obviously. Of
course. So, I guess, does that mean it's time to actually talk about the show, talk about the thing?
Yeah, and I guess I'll drop my actual big question in here, secondary to the why did they have to go so hard?
Important, yeah.
Slightly more detailed. Thinking about this, is the state the solution or the problem?
Oh,
that's our question.
Oh, yeah. I have so many feelings about that. And I think I have an announcement to make in terms of my phrase. I tried really hard to come up with another funny one because I was thinking about making it a bit where like I just have a different phrase for every episode. And I really think I like plot me.
You like plot me? You feel like you were
do.
there? Yeah.
I think, because that's just, Lower Decks is my favorite Star Trek series. That's a big announcement for me. It's the truth. And
it's the best one. Why would your takes not correctly align with the best of all things?
And in Captain Freeman's moment of warp me, just like it hit me so hard. Maybe because I was intoxicated when I was watching it, and
they were intoxicated when they wrote it, I'm sure. So fine.
That was one of the moments where I actually had to like pause the show so I could calm down and then keep going. So I think I'm going with plot me. If people have strong feelings that that's bad, I'm willing to hear people out. But I think that's what I'm going with. So.
I think it's important that we still figure out exactly what that looks like in terms of plot me, right? There are a lot of ways that I think you could deliver that, like a Picard plot me is going to be very different than a Cisco plot me. So I think we should spend some time exploring what your particular plot me is going to be here. But I think it's a great choice. I love it. And I look forward to the reign of plot me.
Yeah, you nailed on the script and then nailed on the delivery. It's a separate art. I get it.
No, I think if you're feeling it, then that's the way to go. Right, go with your instincts. And if you're ready, let's shall we, Captain?
Andor, season 1, part 2. Plot me.
Captain.
So here we are.
Yeah. So we were playing around with this idea of the transporter pitch, but another thing from the surveys was that folks were looking for a little bit more description, a little bit more detail. So we're going to upgrade that a little bit to like a captain's briefing kind of situation, and then move through a bit of highlights and see how that goes.
Which we did kind of in the last episode where we did like kind of a brief, like here is the whole story arc of the first half of the first season, which I want to thank Andor for making very easily because there really are sort of two discrete good plot arcs in the show. One, because it made our job easier as podcasters, and two, it made my life easier in that it didn't leave me with a cliffhanger where I was like really, really mad that I had to wait like 3 or 4 days to finish the season. So
it does raise a question of like, why did they feel like after creating an amazing genre, like achieving heist, that they had to come back and also do a genre achieving breakout? Like just owning 2 genres in one season is brutal.
Yeah. And I'm glad they did. I would actually love to hear an interview, like a behind the scenes interview talking. Tony Gilroy is the name of the guy. I think he's the showrunner, like the executive producer of the whole thing, who, as you pointed out, is one of the guys who was responsible for Rogue One, which makes total sense. About like what that conversation was like in the writer's room, or with the production team, like what the thought was behind that. Which is great, but either way, I'm really glad they did it that way. And so the second half of the first season, we've heisted the Empire. We've taken a whole lot of their money because rebellions are built on hope and dead bodies and money. And then Andor ends up in Empire prison. There's this what do they call it? It's a sentencing directive where the Empire is basically like throw everyone in prison for everything, keep them there forever, and they're not explicit about why. But if you're at all familiar with the Star Wars universe, I was thinking like, oh, that's where they got the labor for the Death Star, because we know at this point Death Star construction is well underway. And
aggressive recruiting.
Aggressive recruiting. Yeah.
Yeah. We can just call this the Patriot Act. There's no reason to like not
honestly
be coy about
yeah.
this here, right?
Yeah.
Let's just call they enact the Patriot Act, and then
Yeah, and so the story is, and they do set it up really well because they sentence Andor to 6 years in prison. So of course, if you think about the timeline for a second, you know that while the rest of the story is going to involve him getting out of that somehow, like how is that going to be a thing? So that was
Right.
immediately exciting because I'm like, oh, we're going to get a jailbreak.
right. And we should note there's a beautiful like dark, Philip K. Dickian kind of comedy to the way that he gets arrested. He's just heisted all this money and he's like gonna go like, get his mom, get out of there, right, be free. And it's not the brilliant reporting and like, research that was being done in the first season or something like that. It's literally just a douchey cop who's like picking up some random people on the street, decides that he's involved in it, and before he can get out of it, like he gets hauled in and gets this max sentence. It's like nothing but stupid dumb luck, and like leads to this moment. And I love that. I love that for a critique of like authoritarian police states, because they just get you. They just get you.
And so he ends up in prison, and a fair amount of the plot of the second half is him sort of integrating himself into that prison workforce, getting to know all of the people involved, learning about the dynamics of how that prison life works, and formulating a way to break out. And, navigating all of the complex social dynamics that are involved there. And the other part of the plot is the Empire setting itself up on Ferrix, whereas they were pretty content to leave Ferrix to corporate security before, because of all of the things that happened in the first half. The Empire's like, nope, we're taking over. We're going to set up shop, and we're going to like really, really clamp down on the locals, and all of the wacky hijinks that ensue.
And it's
that.
Yeah, and it's wonderful because you get the people at the high level being like, our goal is to push them to clamp down, because then they will, turn more people against them, right? And then like the baddies or like the smart ones are like, oh, we shouldn't be clamping down, like this is not a good plan. And at the ground level, it's just people hurting other people,
Yep.
It's just like more suffering for everyone.
Yep. And then the third plot is the interesting interplay between Luthen, our like rebel recruiter / antique dealer friend, Mon Mothma, our senator, who is secretly funding the rebellion, and all of the things that she is trying to do to help the rebellion without getting caught herself. And there's some interesting behind the scenes machinations about like moving around money and how much money she's given. And with all of the new scrutiny that the Empire is coming down, like she's realizing that she's not going to be able to fly under the radar much longer. So she enlists the help of this banker person from her homeworld, who is not super well regarded generally, but is also like a guy who knows how to move money around. So that's
and
really
she ends
interesting.
Up like, and there's some interesting stuff in there about the like she gets entangled with what we might think of as really gross, regressive, like gender, authoritarian, horrible stuff because of that. Can we also just agree that Skarsgård, when he's doing his like I'm selling you stuff character, is clearly doing a Garrick impression. That's obviously
100%, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And not to take it back to the previous episode, but I remember seeing, the first time around, we see him go from his like rebel recruiter, like super hardcore dude, to his like he puts on his wig, he puts on the robe, and he's just got this look on his face that's like, I bathe in rocks. And then all of a sudden he's so fancy, and he does the smile, and he does the little hand flick thing, and he's like getting himself back into character, which is like, I always find it interesting when actors are playing out the process of acting on screen. For some reason, that's always just really interesting to me. And it's a headspace that's really hard for me to get into, and it really makes me appreciate the art of acting so much more to see that sort of thing happen, because the idea of embodying a character who is different than you is a big enough thing that I'm just like, wow, like I'm super impressed that anyone can do that. And to like snap your fingers and be able to turn it around like that, it's impressive, like in an in-universe way, but it's also impressive in a like, wow, he's a really good actor way.
My favorite version of that is stuff like the show Barry, where it's a brilliant actor acting badly, playing a character acting badly, right? So it's like he's a person in a scene who's bad at acting, and he has to play that and then go back to being this brilliant person, character actor, you know, like, love it. So good. So many levels.
So the first thing that I really wanted to talk about is just like the whole dynamic of the prison system and how it works. Because I'm not a fan of making really, really hyperbolic comparisons between like prison and capitalism, right? Because I think the discussion has to be a lot more nuanced than that. But I really did find myself surprised by how, you know, when he gets on the floor and he's talking to Kino, and Kino's like telling him how the job works and all of that, it really, really reminded me of the only warehouse job I've ever had. Where it was like, you know, there's like the guy who is obviously in charge, knows everything about everything, and he's not a terrible person, but he's also not afraid to punch you in the face to get stuff done because he doesn't actually care about you. He cares about getting the work done. And of course, in this universe, his motivation is like, I want to get this done so I can get home because I've got, you know, less than a year worth of shifts left. And in the real world, it's because like, this is my paycheck. This is how I feed my family. I don't care about you. I care about feeding my family. But I found myself really, really struck. Like that was not a conscious thought process where I was thinking about, you know, how I would compare these things. It really, Kino reminded me so much of the like warehouse foreperson that I worked for like 2 weeks. And I was like, I really, really had to sit and think about that.
And you know, if we could spend a whole year just talking about the prison sequence in these couple of episodes, that would be enough for us to cover like Andy Serkis's eyes, right? We could get through whatever is going on with how fucking, God, it's so hard, how compelling Andy Serkis's eyes are in this series. But no, there's so much rich stuff in there, right? The way that it resembles an Amazon facility.
Yep.
The gamification stuff. Oh, I want to talk so much about how even in a prison in this format, they're still using gamification, incentivizing stuff to keep people working competitively in these kinds of ways. It's perfect. It's all perfect. The nutrient tubes where you get flavor if you do well, like it's all pitch perfect to me. Yeah.
And it really is like the difference between that and, you know, a normal like manual labor type job that we might have in the real world is that the rewards and the incentives are obviously different. You know, like you lose your job, or, you know, like you don't get to eat the pizza party versus like you get flavor in your food, or you know, the floor gets electrified,
right,
which is,
right.
I never cease to be impressed by the different ways the human mind can come up with to create torture scenarios. And I don't even mean that in like a funny, jokey way, because when I saw that happening, I thought like that really, really, like it made me feel like real feelings when I realized that was the thing. There's the scene when Andor gets there, there's the 3 guards and they have these like stun baton things. And the lead guard is like, yeah, I bet you're thinking it's pretty bold of us to come here and not have any weapons, right? So here's what the deal is. And they just start like writhing in pain because of course they've done the camera shot thing where it's like, oh, all of the prisoners are barefoot and the guards have these like North Face ski boot looking things on. Like, I bet there's something going on with that. And all of the prisoners work barefoot, and the way that they keep the people under control is by the threat of electrifying the floor to the point of causing them horrible pain or even dying. And that's how they keep them in their cells at night. There's no bars, there's no doors. I mean, there's a door to the like bunking area, but once you're inside there, all of the cells are open. And the thing is, like, if you step out of your cell, you hit the floor barefoot and you get electrocuted and you die. And they even, like, one of the stakes raising things they do is they have a guy commit suicide doing that, which is just like, I can't even make like voidy jokes about that for some reason. That sort of stuff like really, really hits me deeply. I think mainly because, you know, Star Wars is like a, you know, it's like a sci-fi fantasy universe, and so much of the stuff is implausible in that, like, we know that like the technology to do that doesn't exist in the real world. But this is a thing that like a horrible person really could invent and do in real life, and it really would affect people in that way. And the effect that would have on your mind, like knowing that that's a possibility at any given time, it's horrifying. It's legitimately horrifying.
Yeah, and to me, this is very, very like directly pulled from like B.F. Skinner style, you know, Skinner boxes where you take animals and you put them in a space where you can electrify the floor. This is behaviorism. This is all behaviorism 101, which is like a basic psychological approach to manipulating behavior by stimulus response and essentially shocking people or rewarding them. You know, you get all these classic studies about things like learned helplessness, like the way you can teach something to just cower in fear because it doesn't have any options, or, you know, yeah. So absolutely, I would love to spend so much more time talking about like the way that this system is set up to try to control a bunch of people with minimal amount of oversight, and using like all of the horrors of like the human psychology stuff that we learned post World War II.
Yeah. So what did you want to talk about?
I mean, I really only have one thing that I want to talk about, and that's Nemec's monologue. Like,
it's so good.
Other than Andy Serkis's eyes, right? It's just Nemec's monologue for me. Those are the two things.
We could do a whole episode on his eyes. Yeah, well, yeah, you said that earlier.
Right. We could do a whole season.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe years of being behind a mask. It's funny, by the way, the behaviorism stuff, we actually just mentioned it when we did the Lower Decks episode in that shocking scene.
Yep.
So this is like the horrible real version of that.
Yep.
I love that I love that for us. So yeah, Nemec's monologue in the final episode, which is basically just Andor goes and saves his sibling amidst a funeral for his mother that turns into a riot, which is like the most banal way to describe an episode that will make you weep repeatedly.
Yep.
We get two of the best monologues ever written. Like, alongside that line about how like you could never do anything wrong that would like be more than the amount she loves you or whatever. What was the exact line or something? Just brutal.
I love you more than anything you could ever do wrong, I think is the line. And that was another moment where he said that, and I had to pause the episode. Like, I needed a minute because
Yep. It's, if you've ever struggled with relationships with your parents, that was probably a moment where you just had to take a deep breath.
Yep.
But no, there's these two beautiful monologues. One is from Maeve when it's like coming out of the robot during the funeral. And
Marva is her name.
Marva.
Give me
Maeve,
your nerd card.
We go. That's the first one for you where it's going to be just slightly off. Good catch, though. Good job. As captain, you got to manage those
Yeah,
things.
I'm going to start stamping a card. When we get to 5, you got to go stand on the electrified floor.
I got to go get shocked. That's right. No, it's Nemec, I think is how you pronounce the name for the guy, who is the one in the first half, who's the Communist Manifesto guy, gets crushed during the heist, but they have this audio that Andor listens to, and I've heard it, and I've read it, and it's just, I'm not a good actor, as we've learned from the intro skits. But if you will indulge me, Captain, I think it's not too long, and I think it's worth reading out, and it will lead us into our philosophy, because I think it's all of our philosophy perfectly put together.
Well, yeah, let's go.
So if you will indulge me,
I will indulge.
He says, there will be times when the struggle seems impossible. I know this already, alone, unsure, dwarfed by the scale of the enemy. Remember this: freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction. Random acts of insurrection are occurring constantly throughout the galaxy. There are whole armies, battalions that have no idea they've already enlisted in the cause. Remember that the frontier of the rebellion is everywhere, and even the smallest act of insurrection pushes our lines forward. And remember this: the imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural. Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks, it leaks. Authority is brittle. Oppression is a mask of fear. Remember that, and know this: the day will come when all these skirmishes and battles, these moments of defiance, will have flooded the banks of the Empire's authority, and then there will be one too many. One single thing will break the siege. Remember this: try.
I was so ready to just have somebody tell me to where to go march after that.
Give me the brick. Hand me my brick. Let's go.
Yeah. It's so poetically written. It's so good and true. So well read and acted. And the context of this is that, before the heist thing where Nemec dies, or is it after? I forget the exact timing, but Andor ends up with this book that is his manifesto. It's like his philosophy. And that's where this is written down, in that philosophy book. And so hearing those words and reading those words after, they present this kid as a sort of naive, young, idealistic optimist. And, he ends up giving his life for the cause, right? He makes it through the whole heist thing, and then as they're taking off, this thing rolls backwards and crushes him, and he ends up dying. And it's so powerful.
Why does it go so hard? Callie, help me. Why do I have to cry about this stupid monologue by this stupid child?
Because it's
this
so
stupid kids show on
good.
Disney. On Disney. Why is Disney doing this to me? Why does it make me want to brick them because I love them?
Yeah. Well, and that's actually the other thing that I had that I wanted to talk about, were just the monologues, right?
Yeah.
In some of the lines are just, it is some of the best writing that, I just hope whoever wrote these, somebody was like, okay, you're a writer on a TV show, you're doing your job, I respect that. But that line, I owe you a drink for that, or I owe you a cheeseburger, or whatever's your thing, I owe you something of that. Because one really, really great monologue in a season of TV is awesome. But there are 3, 4 in just these few episodes. And I have my favorite lines. So there's a scene in one episode where Luthen is talking to this Empire defector guy. And, he goes to meet because he's like, I've got a kid now. I've been helping you out, but life is different for me now, and I want out. And Luthen is playing the no, that's not how this works. You don't get to get out. And he's like, what have you sacrificed? And he goes through this brilliant speech about what he has sacrificed. And the line that keeps sticking with me, and it's like a meme to say, and I've been thinking about it ever since, but I really, really have been thinking about this ever since. He says, I've made my mind a sunless place. And I just oh my God. Wow. And he goes through all of these things that he's sacrificed. He talks about using the enemy's tools to defeat them, and how he's sacrificed any chance he ever has at kindness or decency or goodness, and that there's no chance that he will ever feel the positive benefits of what he's doing, that he's doing it all for someone else's benefit. And he just has to learn to live with that. And again, just head explode.
Yeah.
And Marva's speech, there is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. And then Kino Loy's speech, when they're doing the prison break, they're in the control room and Andor is like yelling at him like, you do this every day. Like, you're the guy who is in charge. Tell them what to do. And, you know, he does a couple of lines and Andor's like, bro, that's all you got? And then, you know, like the dramatic music starts playing and his face changes because, of course, he's Andy Serkis and he has that expressive face. And you can get like an entire year's worth of communication just from one change in a facial expression. And I went back to watch this monologue because I wanted to pick out like a really good line from it. And I think in retrospect, the thing that impresses me the most about this is that there really aren't any like beautiful or poetic words in it. Like, he's literally just giving them things to do and delivering it with such earnestness and passion, because it's literally just like climb, kill, do whatever you can to get out. If people are confused, help them, take care of them. You know, there's only one way out, and that becomes the like one way out. What
a line.
And it's like, in comparison to all of these like beautiful, poetic, well-written phrases, his speech is, I mean, it's something that like you or I might say, right? Like, get out, stop working.
It's a very direct call to action. Yeah.
But it's still like, it affected me just as deeply as the other ones. And it's, I mean, it's a testament to the writing and of course to Andy Serkis just being unbelievably brilliant.
But also like to the beauty of simplicity that like, yes, it's nice to have those flowery words, but there is value in the simplicity of like, no, there's literally one way out and it's like up and through these people. Yeah.
And I think it's also just a beautiful commentary on that. Like, you don't actually have to be a super eloquent, beautiful, poetic writer to use your words to inspire people. That's a thing that I think a lot of people get stuck in, is like, oh, I can't write like that. Like, I don't have a way with words like that. So I can't inspire people. And like, it's not necessarily true.
Yeah. That line about I use my enemy's tools, I think is probably a direct reference to the quote from Audre Lorde about how the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, which is a big debate in the fields of philosophy that we're about to dive into about like, what is the right way out, right? So, you know, when we say one way out, what is the one way out, I think is like a big question that like this kind of content is trying to wrestle with. And
before we get to the philosophy zone, I will take your second point. We don't need to expand on it a whole lot, but I do love that even in the Star Wars universe, they know that bricks are a very important way to deal with fascists.
Right. And you know, I love a good Chekhov's blank, and Chekhov's brick is my favorite now. It's my all-time favorite. Like, it used to be my favorite was from Expanse, where it was Chekhov's giant ship built for the Mormons, but now it's definitely just Chekhov's brick. Anyone who didn't see what that brick was going to be serving the purpose of, I'm sorry. I was actually thinking that it was legitimately was going to be used to like, you know, they were going to like rebel and tear everything down, and the brick that she was a part of was going to be part of their new like town center, their new town hall or whatever. Like, I didn't see that they were going to do that specifically with it. But it is like, it's a really beautiful, like, sort of cultural thing that this planet has, where when your loved one dies, you cremate them and you build them into a brick that like becomes the cornerstone of a building. That's like, wow, that's actually like really, really beautiful. I love that. And just like, shout out to that scene for being, the music is so perfect. And the sound design is another thing. I feel like we could do a whole episode on the sound design of the show. Yeah. But especially in that scene, especially when they start playing the music, it's very like out of sync and out of tune. And as they're marching through the town, the notes become more congruent with each other and the music becomes more consonant and in sync as they like approach. And it's just, oh my God, it's beautiful on so many levels. But I heard someone suggest that it was based on an IRA funeral. It also looks somewhat like funerals in New Orleans. But yeah, it's haunting. It's a haunting sequence.
Well, I think we might be ready to make the jump to subtextual space.
If you think we should, Captain, then let's go ahead and grok it. I have too many things. We're going to have to just roll back time here a little bit. There are so many concepts that I want to talk about, so many important things going on here. So like last time we talked through like the list of the like organized side of the political spectrum, and of course there is the disorganized side, of which you and I are members, and there are similarly a giant pile of terms for which you might be somewhat familiar with parts of what these things mean. So I'm not going to ask you to explain what the Alliance or what the Rebels are this time through, but I just want to list a bunch of these things just to have them in our heads. We're going to talk primarily about anarchism. You've also got confederation, communism, democracy, federalism, republicanism, socialism, tribalism. All of these could be sort of thought of as being on the left towards the, anarchic libertarian end of the political spectrum. For the most part, like, the common themes there is going to be sort of skepticism about the state and about state power, and claims about whether the state actively or passively causes harms in people's lives, either by doing things like overly protecting private property or denying us the kind of reciprocal relationships that we previously, engaged in when we had like important like community lives together. So a lot of concerns, a lot of things that we're often worried about these days. But I want to talk primarily about anarchism and kinds of anarchism, which is a good thing to say on the internet because no one's ever going to disagree with me about anything that I'm going to say when I start trying to describe these different theories.
Well, and it's also a good thing that anarchism is a very widely understood concept in the wider public discourse.
Very straightforward, simple concept. Yeah.
Not a thing people ever build straw men of or talk about in ways that betray their complete lack of understanding of the topic.
Right. And as with the other kind, the statist side of things, where you have 5 or 6 different versions of capitalism, you can, of course, have 10 million different versions of anarchism or capitalism. I sent you before the show the classic, all of the flags. Everybody can Google all the different colored flags, leftist anarchism, anarcho-syndicalism. What are the best ones? Anarcho-capitalism, obviously, is going to be the one that everyone in our audience is going to be skeptical of. But, of course, we've got solar punk anarchism. We'll talk about that. But no, broadly speaking, right, anarchism means something like a social system, right, that has either no rulers or no government, or some of them will make a distinction between state and government, and they'll say no state, but you can have a government. But it, basically is this kind of skepticism about unified power and the need for a strong central state. Yeah,
I often hear people use the word consensus in discussions about anarchism, and because that's like the popular conception of anarchy is that it's a synonym for chaos, and it's kind of passed into like the public colloquial understanding as anarchy and chaos are the same thing, and that's not what the political philosophy is at all. And that's whenever you begin a good faith discussion about it, that's sort of the first thing is like, well, when people disagree, how do you make a decision? If there's not a concentrated level of power in one person or a group of people's hands, like how do you make decisions when people disagree? And people talk about consensus building. And of course, there's a bunch of different models for how you do that.
Right. So this brings us to our first subversion, right, which is going to be our friends anarcho-communism or anarcho-socialism, which is almost as good as arachno-communism, obviously, as we also discussed off air. Everyone should Google the arachno-communism meme.
Yes,
that'll be a valuable call forward.
Wink, wink.
We are, So anarcho-communism, which interestingly, as far as I can tell, and again, someone's going to cancel me for this, is roughly equivalent to what's called libertarian socialism or something. These are sometimes used interchangeably or fairly similar, and they are essentially getting at what you're, interested in there, which is a anti-state decentralized government system. So that could be, some people might call it tribalism or something, though tribal is a very deeply misleading and sometimes problematic term. I think there are some times in which it is not the wrong term to use, but that's we don't have the time for it. So we're leaving that one aside for now. But yeah, so anarcho-syndicalism, which obviously is the Monty Python reference for folks who love Holy Grail, and that's. So yeah, and like I said, it's similar to libertarian socialism, which makes us, I think, means we have to talk about libertarianism for a second.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's another one that I feel like the political dialogue in the United States has, I think, ruined the meaning of that word as it was intended.
Deeply
because because I feel like if you talk about libertarianism in the United States, there's a very different idea of what that means versus what it means to the rest of the world. And so like maybe it makes sense to take a second to tease that apart.
Right, because if you talk to most people in especially on the left in America, and you said the words libertarian socialism, they would be like, how are those things in any way remotely compatible? Right. So what is libertarianism and how is it different from anarchism? And the answer is they're related, right? So whereas anarchism is a kind of skepticism towards, and maybe a government related to the skepticism towards that organized power, libertarianism is a prioritizing of liberty as a core value. And you can think about that in contrast with the things that we often have to make trade-offs with when we think about liberty, like justice and equity, or taking care of the worst off, or protecting people from risks. So if you think about, very briefly parts of the history of political philosophy, right? The modern era is in many ways the liberal era, because we see a shift from governments that just rule in whatever way they want to governments that, like, for the most part are ruling by the will of the people to some extent, and for the most part are trying to like maximally allow for as many different lifestyles as possible, as long as you're not hurting other people, right? That's your kind of fundamental liberalism, but we're gonna stop you if you start hurting other people, right? Libertarians are sort of, one way to think about libertarians is essentially there are these two like moral foundations that liberals care deeply about, which is fairness and fairness, harm reduction, and liberty. Okay. Libertarians are just liberals who really, really highly prioritize the liberty and may like be unwilling to sacrifice it for any amount of harm reduction or fairness, essentially. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And I think that's okay. What ends up being the difference in value between people in those conversations is like the amount of that they believe should be socially enforced versus enforced by the state, because that's the refrain that you will hear from the like United States style libertarians. They're, at least how they will often profess themselves to think, is that, well, I don't like, I think it's bad if people are treated poorly because they're black or because they're gay or because they're trans, but I don't think the government should have the power to do something about that, which of course ignores the, like, okay, so does that mean if you're just surrounded by shitty people, you're just out of luck? And there's nothing to do about it. So that's where the push and pull comes in terms of like the state might actually be necessary in a situation like that to curb that. Like we're not going to tell you that you have to love trans people, but we are going to tell you that you can't discriminate against them, that kind of thing. And that usually ends up being the sort of push and pull between those two ideas.
Right. So we see that big fight in the civil rights era. And, to talk a little bit about American history and why it's gotten so bad, part of it is Ayn Rand, if we're being honest. Like, part of it is like the picking up of Ayn Rand's style, objectivism, and it's sort of Faustian bargain that gets made both during the, civil rights era, the Southern strategy amongst whites and the GOP, but also I would say sort of the Reagan coalition, specifically between the religious right and the libertarian, economic folks to some extent. And like what I think you see there is the libertarians kind of go all in on like if as long as you're gonna like let us do free markets as much as we want, y'all can, you know, criminalize things that we would obviously be against criminalizing as libertarians, and you get this kind of right-wing libertarianism that is deeply sort of viewed as hypocritical, and, you know, you get Alex Jones and folks like that. But you, of course, do have left libertarians, people who are also skeptical of the state, and who also, you know, want to really highly respect liberty, and they want to legalize almost everything and all that, you know, that sort of stuff. So it is unfortunate that, like, when people think of these folks, mostly what they think of are the anarcho kind of capitalist folks who seem to be like, no state, all free market. I'm fine with being oppressed. You know, I want the boot as long as the boot is like Amazon instead of the government. But that's not all libertarians, right? That's just
hashtag not all.
an unfortunately popular stream of libertarians in America. You know, so, okay. Just now that we've clarified those a little bit, right? There's also, related to these, the actual one they reference in Monty Python is the anarcho-syndicalists, and it's one that gets thrown around enough. I think it's just funny to specifically explain it, which is a subversion that's like, they are in favor of revolutionary industrial unionization, essentially. So they want to overthrow the current system, and they want to do that through revolutionizing, through unionizing, and the goal there is primarily to abolish the wage system. So if you're trying to understand why the upcoming Irish unionization of 2024 is going to result in our post-scarcity Star Trek environment, it's going to be the anarcho-syndicalists. And then, of course, my favorite personal one is going to be the solar punk anarchists, which are going to be sort of not low tech, but like smartly used tech, close to nature, but not natural in the like wooey sense, and, you know, keeping things small, homeostasis, that sort of thing. It's deeply, deeply tempting. Though, you know, we have to talk about all of the like weaknesses of all these things, obviously. Yeah. But like that's our goal, right? Like living in space, solar punk, anarchist style.
Yeah. I mean, that's where I'm at. And, you know, I think the thing between all of these, I don't think we talk about cultural values enough when we talk about politics and how we make decisions about what's good and bad. I think we often will just like sail right past, like, what is the problem that we're actually trying to solve for with our politics? Because I think there is sometimes an assumption among people that we are like working toward the same goal or thinking about the same goal. And the difference is like how we get to that goal. Whereas like if you zoom out a little bit and you talk about like foundationally, what is the world that you want to live in? I don't think we zoom out and have that discussion enough, because so many of the competing ways of organizing society are not actually about the methods. They're about what the problems we're solving for are. Because that's like, because I think the critique of like United States style liberalism is that it is not actually trying to solve for the problem of inequality. It's trying to solve for the conflict between freedom and capital.
Yeah,
you know?
so the term we would use for this is deep moral disagreements, similar to like deep epistemic disagreements. So like if you and I disagree about whether faith is a source of knowledge, we're having a meta disagreement about justification for belief, not just what to believe, right? And you have the same thing in morality, right? I think you're right. Like you and I and the white Christian nationalists want different things that are irreconcilable. And that is a problem. And liberalism was trying to solve that enough that we could live in a society together. And I do think there's a reasonable question about like, what is the limit of who you can be in society with, who you can be in community with? And when you've exceeded that limit, what do you do next? And the answers are all bad.
Well, right. And that's why I end up feeling like, to be clear, I'm not an accelerationist, but I end up having sympathy for their position somewhat often, because I think about for example, you know, people who are pursuing theocracy, for example, their value is not actually human well-being. None of the problems that they are trying to solve for are the actual well-being of humanity. They're trying to solve for the well-being of your soul, the well-being of the souls of them,
which they
and their
consider
people, and,
to be the actual well-being of humanity, though.
Right.
That's the deep disagreement part, right?
Exactly. And that becomes the overriding concern, such that reality is not even a thing that we share, which is why, arguing scientific facts or like historical reality doesn't work, right? Because that's not, it's not that they care not at all for those things. It's just that whatever goal they're going towards is more important to them than that. And so, they either invent a way to say that, that's where a lot of conspiracy theories come from, right? Is like that if that were true, it would break my worldview. Therefore, that can't be true. And here's all of the gymnastics I'm going to do to try to prove that this isn't true. And that's why I end up like getting frustrated and opting out of so many of these political discussions, because it's like we just have a fundamental, like we live in different realities, and I don't know how to fix that.
Yeah, and there isn't a way, I don't think, and that's why I just defended my qual exams, where I argued that like we should abandon the liberal intuition that we can teach morality in a neutral way, and we should just be teaching like a genuinely progressive agenda, and like the white Christian nationalists aren't going to like it, but there's nothing we can do about that. We need to because otherwise we have this crisis of meaning and value where people don't know. Feel like they are adrift in this kind of way. But before we run out of time, I do want to dive into one specific concept that I think is part of anarchism that is really importantly highlighted in Andor in particular, which is the concept of mutual aid. So this has been in the, it comes into and out of the language of Vogue a lot, but I wanted to try to unpack what that means, which is sort of the simple version is people are nice and care about each other. This comes from an anarchist named Peter Kropotnik, which is just a great name.
Very good name.
And let me assure you, he has a beard that matches the name. So if you were concerned about that, he is crushing it on the beard front.
was deeply worried. I'm glad you did that for me.
No, he is a full-on season 2 Kropotnik. So what does he argue for? He has these books, Mutual Aid, a Factor in Evolution, and The Conquest of Bread, both heavily influential. And he's writing in a time when people are arguing about the nature of human beings in light of modern scientific research about things like evolution in particular. And he essentially argues, and this was very out of popular view at the time, that humans actually evolved rather than being competitive creatures to be pro-social mutualists, that our advantage is working together. And this is in direct conflict with, amongst other individuals, the extremely racist Francis Galton, who I actually learned at QED invented the literal dog whistle, not the figurative dog whistle. He's more well known for being the father of eugenics.
Oh boy. Wow.
Yeah. Isn't that a great combo? Adam Rutherford's in his talk on eugenics dropped that beautiful little bit of information. So yeah, Galton, terrible in so many ways, but promoted eugenics and promoted the idea of social Darwinism, right? That like survival of the fittest in that very, very simplistic way. You also have, but let me say, Kropotnik is in conflict on the left with folks like Rousseau, who believed that like human beings cooperated through a kind of enlightened universal love or something like that. Kropotnik's view is a little more complicated. He thinks that we just evolved to be pro-social, but in a complicated way with like our community, right? So we have the classic in-group, out-group behavior where you're, ride or die for your family, but like couldn't really care less about people who aren't part of your community. And he thought that was adaptive, and there's a plausible evolutionary argument for that. You also have the Hobbesian view, which is the sort of humans are horrible creatures like everything else, right? Life is nasty, brutish, and short. So let's build a state that like holds a hammer over everybody's head and says, don't do anything bad or we'll brick you. Right. So that's like the environment in which he's debating. And this is a really important debate because what you think about these different views has a huge impact for what you think about how our politics should be designed, right? If you think that humans are Rousseauian in nature, you're going to want a tiny to non-existent government. Whereas if you think they're Hobbesian in nature, you're going to want, big bricks everywhere. Everyone can carry a brick, right? Free right to carry of bricks, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So how do we figure this sort of thing out? And the answer is it's hard. We don't actually know what human nature is. We know how humans act in a bunch of different environments, in a bunch of different situations. We know that human nature is highly adaptive. One of my favorite books, The Secret of Our Success, is that human beings are adaption machines. We just learn to do new things. We mostly do it through mimicking each other socially. So that's an argument, I think, in favor of Kropotnik's view of humans as pro-social creatures. Our strongest adaptation is mimicry. But we don't know how, good or bad, quote unquote, we are. And there's a lot of really interesting books and debates about this that are often these doorstop style, Debt, the First 5,000 Years, I think, is one of these kind of books. Humanity, I think, is or something like that is another one that came out recently, where they kind of, they push back on what they see as the conventional wisdom, the Hobbesian view that they think dominates. And they say, look, we're actually not that bad. Stop worrying about the collapse of civilization. Just let it collapse. Or something along those lines. Not necessarily exactly that, but hey, maybe money's bad. Maybe you should actually just not like money, it turns out.
Right.
And they often do this by undercutting the story of barter, for example, this idea that before money, everybody just bartered everything, rather than reciprocal altruism being the kind of driving relationship between a lot of people for much of human history. So, you have these debates, and then you have, of course, pushback to this idea, right? You're going to have objections, and I'll just lay out a few because I know we're running short on time. Challenges are going to be can it really transform society? So I think, to go back to Andor, the quote, you mean nothing to them. Oh, that's nice. You have a little community. You have a soup kitchen. That's great. There's a lot of debate about whether the Black Panther soup kitchens actually activated people or made a difference or something like that. It may just not. We may just be too small in that kind of way. Other ones would be, can it generate political power, right? And I that moment in Andor where he's talking about the prosperity zone and the hospitality shelters slowly genociding the population makes me think of how easy it is to sap that power. It's also difficult to sustain over time, and this brings me back to the opening of that beautiful monologue, right? There will be times when the struggle seems impossible. I think for a lot of us right here, right now, every day feels that way a little bit, where it's I don't see any way out of that. There's no one to brick, right? It doesn't work that way. And then the concern, maybe it reinforces existing power dynamics because it returns us to this parochialism where we care too much about our own community and not enough about others. And that made me think of the last monologue where it's, we took their money and then forgot about it when they left.
Yeah.
And how it doesn't allow for solidarity because you are staying so isolated in this way. So
and I think what's so hard about that is that the culture that very much dominates the world now is very much about concentration of wealth and power. And I think, we can make arguments in a lot of different ways about whether that's a good or a bad thing, but it is a thing that you can say is very skilled at concentrating power. And I think any sort of collectivist style of thinking is not as good at concentrating power. And so if you want to fundamentally change culture, and this speaks back to the speech that Luthen was making, you kind of do have to co-opt that style of amassing all of that power so you can defeat the power that is holding you down. But the people who have done that are people who grow up in this culture where you are taught that once you have that power, that is security and you can never let that go. And I think that's, the communist ideal, I think is one attempt at answering that question, in that, you have the communist revolution and then there's state socialism for a minute and then the state kind of fades away. And that's, there's another version of the sort of socialist revolution thing that it doesn't involve like an overthrowing of the government, but it involves the idea of like building up mutual aid networks such that the state becomes irrelevant.
Right.
But like, and again, like I love that idea, but we also see how the state reacts when anything actually starts to threaten its monopoly on power. And if you don't then have the power to defend that, then like it ends up not really solving any problems. And yeah.
Right. Right. The Articles of the Confederation kind of problem. How do you raise taxes? How do you defend your community against a much stronger, more authoritarian force? And it's why, yeah, the culture, right, our anarchist future dream is run by super powerful, super intelligent AIs who plan everything and protect us from all of those problems in a way that maybe vaguely undercuts some of the things we want.
No drawbacks there.
That obviously for another time. We'll save that. We'll put a pin in that. But yeah, your choices here are statism, anarchism, revolutionary violence. Right. Those are the choices. Those are the questions we're asking here. And I think it's really fascinating. I come back to this a lot with things like Lovecraft Country and Andor. Media can basically condone revolutionary violence in a way that you as an individual, if you were to stand up and say, I think we should, violently take to the streets, you would get major pushback. And part of that is because, and this is the critique by folks on the critical side of liberalism, is that maybe this actually prevents us from changing things because it gives the illusion of an alternative to revolutionary violence when there isn't one. And it saps our, but we're gonna have to save the talk of revolutionary violence for another time. I think, season 2, we don't know how it's gonna work out or not, but I think these are all really difficult questions. And I love the way that, and I love most of all that Andor never loses sight of the human tragedy of these questions. It never becomes just, a big overarching political philosophical debate. Even in that final funeral sequence, you have characters feeling compromised, changing places, and just random people dying. And that's the cost. If you're for revolutionary violence, the worst off will eat it the hardest during the transition.
Yeah. And something that I appreciate is that I feel like the writing and the cinematography of the show is such that it really is just sort of presenting that reality to you. And I don't think the show is really trying to make you feel any particular way about any particular side of the thing. It is just presenting to you like, this is the reality of what this looks like. And, we can kind of take our own like feelings and conclusions from that. And I think it's super effective storytelling, just like in a way that is entertaining and a really good watch. But I also think it has a lot like bigger and deeper things to say about, people who really who are feeling very, very desperate for some sort of like radical, fundamental systemic change, because like what we're doing now is definitely not working when it comes to human flourishing.
Yeah, no, it's such a great inversion of that light side, dark side simplicity.
Yep.
But all right, we got to cut it. But obviously, folks, hopefully you can hear the need, right? The desperate need for more time. But we're going to leave it there, and we'll tease some things, right? So
yeah.
First up, I guess it's my job this time. Oh, no, I'm going to read the questions. I'm going to read the names. Yeah. So you're going to do our teaser. Let's do it.
Yeah. So the next 2 episodes are going to be our Q&A episodes. So the way that I'm kind of looking at this is that the Lower Decks episode and the 2 Andor episodes were kind of like the prequels to season 2, and the Q&A is going to be the kickoff for season 2. So kind of give folks a chance to maybe get to know me a little bit better, but also just like whatever sort of burning questions you have about philosophy for Aaron, and there's really no framing for what these questions have to do with, right? You can just kind of like, it's kind of an AMA, right, or AUA, ask us anything.
right. Ask us anything. We will try to get to as many as we can, interspersed with thanking all of our patrons. So another reminder, change your Patreon names. We have a permanent Q&A post, on the Patreon. So if you are a patron or decide to become a patron, you can go ahead and post your question there. We will obviously try to get to as many questions as we can, but we will give priority to patron questions. And that's not the only thing we're teasing, though.
So we are we're going to do our first book after the Q&A episodes. And books are long and take a long time to finish. And we were really thinking like we should maybe surprise folks so people would get excited. But because books take a long time to listen to or read, we figured we'd just go ahead and throw it out there now. So folks, if you want to follow along, you've got time, because I've already gotten started and I already have so many feelings. So we're going to talk about some
uplifted feelings.
Some uplifted feelings. Talk about some sexy, sentient spider folk.
Yes, we're going back to the best universe ever.
Yeah, currently I'm listening to Children of Time, which I know there has been an episode on before, and then after that I am going to go through Children of Ruin, and then we're going to do an episode about that, which I am just so deeply excited for, because I really have not torn through a fiction book the way that I have torn through this one in a very, very long time. It is just, from start to finish, it is so good. If you are horny for world building, like I'm horny for world building, again, one of the reasons I loved Andor so much is so much of it is just world building and telling you what are things like in this world, what are things like in this universe, how did we get to where we are. It is so good at having, like, there is definitely a narrative, things happen, the story moves forward, but it feels so big and complete and expansive, and I think does such a good job of anticipating what questions I have that, like, I'm sure if I think about it later on, I'll have all kinds of questions that aren't answered. But in the construct and the framing of the narrative, I don't know that there's ever been a thing where it's like, oh, I'm so desperate to know the answer to this question and we didn't get it.
Right.
So yeah, very excited.
For me, I think Children of Time is just a truly flawless masterpiece. We did 3 episodes on it back in season 1. I definitely recommend people read it or reread it, because it's always good another time through. Even though it's 500 pages, you will get through it quite quickly, because it is so readable, it's so accessible, and it is, of course, the episodes where I was certainly most horny on main on this show for obviously ported reasons, and I was, a little nervous to do Children of Ruin, because while I like it a lot and I'm really, really enjoying rereading it the second time through, Children of Time is a hard act to follow. But I think we're going to have some fun on this one. So there are some ways in which it'll step things up that will be, I think, thoroughly entertaining for our own world building, let's say. And other than that, I'm just so jelly that you get to go through it. Like, you've been messaging me, like, where you are in it. And every time I have so much feels. It's such a perfect story. So very excited. Look forward to that. And I guess that means I should read some names.
Yeah. Time to thank our wonderful patrons.
Yes. Thanks to our strong enough AIs that they can help us survive long enough to uplift a new planet patrons. Collecting samples for a non-consensual spoken word album. Big Easy Blasphemy. Dude. Corey Ebert. Jesta. That Bastard Neil Polzin. Jesse Rabinowitz and Brenda Goodman. Alex Arnett, and all the thanks to our absolutely, definitely, totally not a clone, I got nothing here, I'm so broken by Andor patrons. We scared Thomas away with terrible movies. Thank you all so very much.
All right, Aaron, I have a very desperate need to talk about this problematic kink of mine that came up for me in Andor, so I think maybe it's time to go to the After Dark.
Let's do it.
It's Philosophers in Space After Dark.
I just have to talk about fascist fashion.
Yes, I also have notes about how good they are at that. Boss bitch and fash feminism. At top of my list.
I didn't say this in the main episode. I probably should have, but I was unprepared for the investigator lady's turn, because in the first half of the first season, she seemed like this very earnest bureaucrat, like a true believer who maybe didn't recognize the cruelty of what she was doing and the badness of what she was doing. But in the second half of the season, just entirely embraces it and she's actually terrible. But Cyril Karn and that get up that he has for his job, where he's got the turtleneck thing and
The slightly higher collar.
yeah, that his mom, who is, I think, there aren't officially any Force users in this show, but I do think his mom is a Sith Lord, if only in an honorary fashion. But she, well, we know he has a predilection for modifying his clothes. He's definitely like a cosplayer in the Star Wars universe, because he modified his security uniform, whatever, and then he goes
absolutely.
He goes to that job interview, and he has he raised the collar and stuff, and of course his mom has to criticize him for that because that's who she is as a person. But this outfit that he wears to his job at the Standards Bureau or whatever it is, so it's not exactly as high as a turtleneck, but it's like a little bit higher, and it's not a button up, it's a closed neck thing, and it's got like whatever fashy Star Wars version of a tie is, where there's a flat cylindrical grommet kind of thing that goes through it, something. And there's just like a rectangular tie that hangs from it, and then there's like a weird cardigan style thing that he has, and I just I could not stop thinking about it. I don't even find him as a person super attractive. He's a good looking dude, but I don't find him super attractive.
Yeah.
But that outfit, yes, Standards me to daddy.
He definitely gives the impression of somebody who someone would try to correct them at a convention on their costume, and they'd be like, oh, actually, this is a special uniform from this particular episode. You're completely wrong. Go fuck yourself.
Yes. Yes.
I can see him doing it, right? He's pitch perfect on all of that stuff. Yeah. And I like it as one of the sort of subtle critiques, if we're buying this idea that authority is brittle, one of the ways it might be brittle is that it does seem to prevent innovation, right? In these kind of authoritarian societies, you're expected to stay in line, but staying in line often means following the person in front of you who, oh, there's a puppy. We got an After Dark puppy sighting. Following the person in front of you, who, doesn't know as much, or has the old time way of thinking about things. So the example for me was the conflict in episode 1-7 with Deidre, where she's, doing good work, and it almost could go badly for her because she's kind of stepping beyond her, what she's allowed to do kind of thing. But, these systems that run on bureaucracy don't allow for sort of flexibility in that kind of way. And it's even you can't raise your collar a quarter inch or something, or you'll be viewed as, a nail that has to get hammered down or something.
Yeah, which is I'm wondering if that is foreshadowing a little bit, because Cyril Karn is even by the end of season 2, we're not 100% sure. He is obviously a true believer, because he's stalking Deidre and trying to insert himself into the important things that are happening in this universe. But of course, at the end of season 2, he ends up saving her life. And I think, when, she gets grabbed out of the crowd and pulled away, I don't know if this was what they were going for, but I think what was going on in her mind was that she was about to get sexually assaulted, and she turns around and it's this creepy stalker dude who actually showed up and saved her life. And I could see, just a lot of the other things, I could see that being the thing that gets him actually on the inside and gets him the position that he wants in advancing the Empire and protecting the Empire. But I could also see that her doubling down on the no, dude, fuck you, get out of my face, thanks for saving my life, but I told you to fuck off and you're not fucking off. And that being the thing that finally radicalizes him. And I feel like they may be flagging those subtle ways that he likes to rebel in not quite following the rules and, sending in all of those reports about Cassian Andor when he's not everybody wants him to just okay, you're an Imperial drone, dude, know your place, get in line. And he's not interested in doing that. and it's like, I feel like either he's going to become like a Sith Lord or he's going to join the rebellion and be like a Saw Gerrera type. I feel like there's no in between.
I agree. Or like he's going to become, maybe he's the one on the inside who helps them get the plans or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
If you go back and watch the monologue in the funeral, watch his face in particular. He looks like his egg cracks in that moment for me. Like I think he's a bit of a moment of like, oh shit, we're the baddies.
Right,
we really
right.
are the fucking baddies. So I do think it's a really complicated character, right? Because he goes through that and then he saves her. So it's like, was it a moment of doubt? Is that the beginning of the slide? Well, I guess we'll have to find out, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's beautifully acted, right? He's not our first choice for other activities, but I think he really does an amazing job with that character.
Other activities, that's good. I like that.
Right. And I also love in those sequences the scale thing. We talked about the scale in the first episode, but those bureaucracy moments. The rooms full of people all sitting at these boring, horrible-looking desks. Like, it really is beautiful, Kafka-esque paintings kinds of vibe.
Yeah, and I love the cinematography where they deliberately show those wide shots so you can see like everybody is at the same workstation, they're wearing the same clothes, and there's just like endless floors where people are doing this probably it's probably not meaningless because I feel like the Empire would probably not do work that's entirely meaningless, but like work that is certainly not going to contribute to their personal fulfillment or well-being.
Right, and it totally has that you are nothing to them vibe that you got in the first, half with the Rebels as well, where it's just like, sure, technically they need you, but you're also completely redundant and they'll replace you with somebody else and you're a face, you're nothing to them in that kind of sense. So like, yeah, I think the point is whether you're the oppressed or the oppressor, you're still dehumanized in a system like this. Which is a hard thing. It dehumanizes everybody equally.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to reckon with. And that's, speaking of After Dark moments, our rebel lesbian couple friend, I forget what the exact line is, but it's like, the rebellion gets everything, we get what's left. Mm-hmm. And like, you can tell that, these two love each other and that they care for each other, and that like, that's not necessarily diminished, but they just know that in their head they have a higher purpose, and that if they give too much of themselves to that relationship, that they might end up choosing it over the rebellion. And I just, I think in some sense that is a necessary headspace to get into if you're going to be part of a revolution like that. But I found myself in those moments really thinking about like what would it look like to actually get into that headspace. And it's such a dark place that like I don't know if I would survive a shift to that mentality. Because so much of what I value in life is my relationships with other people, like whether it's romantic, sexual, friendships, whatever. Like that's the number one most important thing to me in life is my relationships with other people. And it is so hard for me to imagine saying to someone like, the rebellion gets everything, we get what's left. I think Mon Mothma says the same thing to somebody else, right? And it's just woof. I don't know. And like, does that make me a bad communist? Like.
I don't think so. I mean, like, I think I love it as content whenever the content acknowledges that revolutions, while moral, are horrible for the people involved. Rarely does anybody who is part of it actually get to benefit from it. Usually their lives are made worse off in the conflict or something. So like, that's accurate to me. That feels real to me, and I think that's worth including. And it reminds me of a bunch of different stuff. Like it reminds me of in Letter from a Birmingham Jail, MLK has this part where he talks about like the purification process you have to go through before even doing nonviolent protest, where he says, look, if you're gonna, if you think that you're the sort of person who can't take a hit without swinging back, you got to get out. Like you can't be part of these protests because we can't afford it. And he's not saying you have to be able to do it. He's saying acknowledge that you can't and don't make that someone else's problem, which I think is, accurate. And like, we need to be honest about the limits of our ability to make those kinds of sacrifices for the revolution. We talk in ethics about like what's obligatory versus what's super erogatory, which is the fancy way of saying it's good, but we can't require you to do this.
Right.
We can't demand of someone that you sacrifice yourself to this degree. And I think, it's hard to see the sacrifices that people go through in this show as being something that everyone is obliged to do. I think what you see in the show a lot of times is that like revolutionaries are angry, miserable people who are doing the right thing because they've been harmed, because someone they loved was killed. And that, that doesn't make them like bad people, right? But it doesn't, it's the reality for a lot of people that it's not sort of the noble ideals come after the pain or something like that.
Yeah. Well, and if you know anything about the larger Star Wars universe, it is really a saga of sort of unending war and revolution and war and revolution and war and revolution. And like, it feels like it kind of mirrors real world history in some ways. Like I was so into Andor that I just started like diving super deep into like Star Wars lore videos and like trying to learn more about the, like the bigger universe. And it gets complicated with like there's Star Wars Legends, which is like what canon was before Disney took over, and then there's like canon now that Disney owns it.
Fancy way to say extended universe.
Right, exactly. And a thing that I didn't know is that after the rebellion wins, obviously that's not the end of it, because there are still like imperial holdouts. And so there are still battles to be fought there, even though the emperor's dead and the empire is ostensibly defeated. There are, imperial holdouts that kind of become their own like territorial warlord type people. And then there are, even in the newer trilogy, you have the First Order, which is like, just in case the empire loses, we're going to squirrel away these forces and this military hardware to come back and try to fight again. And then,
sure.
And then there's like, in the span of like 40, 60, 70-ish years, there's like 3 or 4 of those big back and forths between there's like a new republic, and then it turns into an empire, and then there's a rebellion, and there's like switching sides and switching alliances, and it gets very complicated and very messy in a way that feels very real.
Yeah, and could lean towards a kind of conservative cyclical view of history that like there's no progress, there's just going in circles in this way. But like I will give my final thought, then let however you want to wrap us up. But we've talked a lot of darkness on this 2 episodes,
Have
but
we
there is a
ever?
really optimistic core to Andor, right? At the end of Andor, a mercenary is turned into a true believer, right?
Yep.
We were talking about, conversions. He becomes the believer in the end. And I want to go back to the end of Nemec's monologue, right? Where the last line of it is just, remember this, try, which, I was so like in shock throughout that entire episode. It took me, I think, 2 listens of it to recognize that's a reference. It's a reference for folks who are somehow like literally not familiar with anything in media. You have, Yoda's very, very famous line, do or do not, there is no try. Which is a very binary, the old ways of thinking for me, like part of the Star Wars universe that I don't love, even though I love Yoda, that black and white thinking, right? And this is a repudiation of that. Just like Yoda lighting the tree on fire, I think was a repudiation of a lot of the terrible parts of the Jedi Order. This is try, like it matters, do it, try, it might help. Like, yes, it's, horribly overpowering and terrifying and all these things, but like, do it anyway, try. And I love that. So I'm glad to see, like Star Wars evolving, not just as media, but like philosophically into, a better message, I think, for people.
Yeah.
Even if we can say, like this message is complex, I think that's there and that's important.
Yeah. And, it makes sense that it's dark, because the reality is that like revolutions are dark and scary. But I do think there is a little taste in there of like everything is necessary. Like it is necessary at some point to maybe like pick up a gun and point it at a bad guy. But like that's not all that there needs to be. And that goes back to the the soapbox that I always get on when people talk about like changing hearts and minds or like making progress or whatever. And I think part of the culture that we are brought up in tells us that you have to do the big flashy famous thing to make a difference. So you have to have like a podcast or a YouTube channel or a Twitch stream or whatever that like a lot of people watch. And like at that point you have influence and you can do things that matter. But like if you have a social circle, like you can do things that matter. Like if nothing else, you can make your social circle a safe place for folks to be. And you can despair the fact that that is not gonna fix creeping fascism, you know what I mean? But like providing a refuge for people is actually really valuable too. Like that actually really does matter. And I adore Marva talking about how like she seems to recognize like I am too old to pick up a gun and point it at someone, but that doesn't mean that I can't be a part of the thing in some way, somehow. You know, whether that's, you know, making a speech that my cute little droid friend broadcasts or, you know, being baked into a brick that meets a fascist face.
Even the smallest act of insurrection pushes our lines forward. When I first heard that line, I was just, oh, fuck you.
Yeah. Well, and remember this, try is like, I think there's something very beautiful about, you know, he's using very big, flowery, poetic language that is, you know, like beautifully constructed, well put together. And remember this, try. Like it's so straightforward. It's so direct. And it really is just a like, just figure out what you can do and go fucking do the thing. And it doesn't have to be pointing a gun at someone. It doesn't have to be marching through the streets or like burning buildings down or anything like that. Like just like whatever is your thing, just go out and fucking do it. Thanks again to our listener units and patron units. Your support makes our internet broadcast possible. If you want to hear more from us, check out our other internet broadcasts, Queersplaining and Embrace the Void, as well as our wonderful editor Louisa Lyons Filmed Live Musicals podcast. Leave them all 5-star ratings and reviews on your podcast application. You can follow us on Twitter at ZeroGPhilosophy or email us at philosophersinspace@gmail.com. If you want to support the show and get even more juicy sci-fi hot takes, consider joining the crew over at patreon.com/0G. Just $2 a month gets you early access to episodes and after dark content. Until next time, friends, stay gooey.